Ooh, greetings friends and welcome to the air ability guide. Friends, in this video I'm going to show you how to do an air slash. I'm going to show you how to do some wind breath. I'm going to show you how to do a tornado. I'm going to show you how to do the air scooter. And not only that, I'm also going to show you how to do an air dash. I mean, it's also a ground dash, but it's, yeah, basically just the ability to do a cool dash in midair. Woohoo! Without further ado, friends, let us get stuck in. Whoop whoop. Let's look at the air slash, which is kind of like a basic airbender attack, kind of like they pull their hand back and they do a nice whip of wind. So this is kind of similar to the fire slash that we did in the fire ability guide, with a few modifications. So we're going to go modes, and then we're going to go paint mode. Then let's go into our guides and put on a surface snap. In terms of colors, I think we'll go for white or a kind of grayish white. I'm just going to go for pure white over there. And then in terms of flex, I think that you can sort of see whatever works for you. Straight's pretty good. Baroque is pretty good. So I'm going to go with the Baroque stroke. Now we're going to use frame by frame animation for this one. So I'm going to start off, and ultimately I'm going to make something like this, you know what I mean? But we're going to start small. So it's kind of like as you first do the wind slash, it starts small. Then we're going to go frame by frame, next frame. And you can still sort of see where the old one was. There's a bit of like a reddish, pinkish onion skin there. So we're going to make it a little bit bigger then. And with these kinds of things, the more frames you do, the better. So we basically start with a small beginning of a slash or a whip, or whatever it might be. And we basically just increase it. We make it larger and larger. And don't be afraid to make it like pretty large. And because it's air, you don't have to worry too much about like, you know, filling in the spaces and being like super exact. If it's a little bit, you know, if the wind is flaring out a little bit, that's also pretty cool. So it's almost looking like a bit of a strayed string, as it were. It's kind of interesting, like designing air stuff, because it's such a sort of incorporeal substance and has so many different forms. So I mean, it's looking pretty good at the moment. We're going to go bigger and bigger. And kind of as we're moving this way, the start point is moving further to the right, shall we say. So we sort of started back here, but it's kind of like it's moving, and that's sort of simulating the movement of the air slash itself. Lovely stuff. Next frame. And then we keep moving. And I think that as we continue to move right, it's going to sort of start to dissipate as well. So this is the first one that's kind of like a little bit thinner than the others, or not as long. And now I'm going to sort of start to make it a little bit more to the right. It's kind of dissipating now. We're going to create a few slashes. As you can see, we're going sort of thinner and thinner. Now we're sort of drawing the last few little strands. Next frame, a few here and there, barely sort of visible. And then maybe one more, which is just like a few almost imperceptible ones. Lovely. So now if we go back and we play this, we've got a pretty nice wind slash going on over here. Alrighty friends, so now we have a lovely wind slash, which is looking pretty cool at the moment. It is moving a little bit slowly, so once you've sort of, if you're struggling to see where your slash is, just press R3 so that you'll see it sort of moving through its animation. It might sort of like appear invisible, but we're going to go L1 and square. Then we're going to go to frame by frame, and we're going to increase the speed of it. We'll maybe make it something like 14. If you make it 15, then it kind of moves very smoothly, but of course it moves very quickly. So it's important that if you want to have like a whole bunch of if you want it to be like kind of a longer animation, you need to add more frames. So at the moment I think we've got 13, which is not bad, but of course as you can see it's pretty short. You can adjust the speed of it, of course, but just keep in mind that as you do, it sort of makes it a little bit slower. So I think 14 is kind of the lowest when it comes to like a smooth animation. 15 is of course the most smooth, but you really have to add quite a few animations there. So I quite like 14, but of course whatever your preference is. Now friends, we're actually going to basically turn this wind slash into something of a physical object, so that we can sort of interact with it a bit more interestingly. I'm going to put down we're going to go into sculpt mode and get ourselves just a cube, put on a grid snap, and just throw it down. I might make it white just so that it's kind of discernible. A nice white cube, and we know that these are going to be together. So we click on our paint stroke, we click on our cube, and we group them together. Now, not only do we want our cool wind slash to be, you know, a cool attack, we want it to actually interact physically with objects. So the way that we're going to get it to basically work like wind and blow objects around, blow objects and enemies around, is that we're going to use our cube. So we've grouped these together, the paint stroke and this chap. I'm going to go gadgets, logic and processing, and grab ourselves boop, 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 a little microchip, and we're going to surface snap it onto both of them. So of course if I grab it, wow, both are moving here. Now what you're going to do is you're going to put down a little timeline, and inside this timeline you're going to put a force applier. So we're going to go move as an output, and we're going to get a force applier. This is perfect because it's even got the like wind sort of icon. It's fabulous. So now friends, what we're going to do is we're going to set up where the force applier is applying force. So let's move this microchip out of the way. We'll put this over here. And I think that in terms of shape, we're going to want the ellipsoid. And why do we want the ellipsoid? Because it has kind of like a bit of a squashed, and it can have an elongated shape, something like this, which I think is quite useful. And generally with this, friends, you'll actually want to make it bigger. So at the moment, I'm kind of making it a similar sort of dimensions to the wind slash itself. But generally you'll want to make this a bit bigger, so turn the grid snap off so you can have a little bit of free reign, and make this decently large. And we're going to now go to the tag section, and we're going to make sure that it doesn't affect friends. It'll only affect foe and maybe scenery or whatever it is. So if you have some enemies, you want them to get pushed. If you have scenery, you want it to be pushed. Or maybe objects. For now I'm just going to make it foes, and I'm going to make a fairly large sort of zone. Lovely stuff. Now as this moves, I've just pressed the R3 button quickly to sort of, I tapped it and then tapped it again. We're going to see that this is moving along with the animation itself. So we don't just want this thing to be applying force in one area, we want the force applier to actually move along with the wind slash itself. So this is pretty cool because generally when we use force appliers, we're just applying applying force in one direction or in one area. But I'm going to show you how to basically make the force applier go like woohoo, like yoo-hoo, along with the slash itself, so that it has kind of like a bit more of a realistic application of force, and it looks cool, which is the most important thing, I think. So what we're going to do is we're going to increase the sort of duration of this. I'm just going to see, I'm going to press R3 to play, and I'd say that it's about this point, just before the 1 second mark, that the animation finishes. So we only really need this to be about a second. We'll make it maybe a little bit shorter. Sha sha. So at this point it's done. I'm just pressing R3 and then pressing again as soon as I'm sort of perceiving that the animation is done. It's going to go shwa, shwa, shwa. Let's see, something like that. Okay, cool. Now what we're going to do, friends, is actually add in some keyframes. So I'm going to add in a keyframe here, and the first one I'm going to move the force applier so that it's over here. Lovely stuff. I'm going to put it sort of kind of centrally. I'm going to put a default one just over there, just an empty keyframe, and then I'll add a blend. Now when it moves here, it's going to move in a straight line. So if we go like this, we're going to see it'll go in like a kind of a straight line, not much of a curve at all. But if we add another keyframe, we can just copy this one, and we can make it so that we know the sort of slash goes in this sort of curve. It moves sort of like this. So I'm going to curve this a bit more and have it about here or so. We might adjust the size of the force applier and so on and so forth. Let's just have a look. So it's going to go swing. So at the moment it's still kind of a little bit straight. We're not getting that nice curve. So we might need to add in another keyframe. So let's do that there. Let's do that there. And then let us go and add in another keyframe and put it sort of hereabouts. So that should hopefully make it a bit smoother. So now it's going to go swing. Let's just make it so that this first keyframe kind of just positions it in the default starting position. So we'll just put it over there. So the first keyframe is when the force applier is here. The second keyframe, it's over there. The third one, and so on and so forth. But of course, we know that the animation is ending by the point that this force applier ends. So let's move a little bit closer. See if we can arrange it nicely here. So now, as we play, it'll go swing. So that's pretty cool. I think I will do it like so. Okay. And then just to demonstrate, I'll loop it. It might be slightly misaligned because they're not sort of working at the same time. But let's go swing, swing. So that's looking pretty cool, friends. You see there's a slight delay just because of it's not ending exactly on the time, but that's okay for now. We're getting the vibe that this force applier is moving with the slash itself. So now when you see the slash, it's actually going to be pushing when it is sort of aligned with that paint stroke. So the force applier and the paint stroke are now aligned, which is very cool. I think let's go to this paint stroke now, and we'll go to frame by frame, and we're just going to have play once. And we're going to go back to this timeline, and we're going to have play once as well. So it's going to go, if we select our force applier, we play once, it's going to go swing. That is looking pretty awesome. Swing. We might want to make the zone a little bit bigger. So for example, at the end of this animation, you can see the strokes are like quite big. So what you might want to do is, for this sort of stage, maybe oops, maybe move this a bit closer here, just a tad, so it's sort of a little bit more aligned. And for this one, we might move it a little bit more to the side actually, and also make it a tad bigger. So now it'll go something like swing, and you'll see that it gets a little bit bigger. So all of these things you kind of adjust as you see fit when you're making your particular slash. It's not exactly lining up with it, but that's okay. And we can also just sort of make it bigger if you're feeling it's a little bit too small or whatever it might be. But let's turn this into an ability now. So now we currently have a little box that goes shwang, and it's going to be affecting foes. So let us put on a little, before we turn it into ability, let's give ourselves something to knock over. So we'll go into sculpt mode, get ourselves some rounded cubes, put on a grid snap, and just throw one down. We're going to go into this one's physical properties and make it movable. Lovely stuff. I'm going to make a few of them, make some copies. Lovely. Make some copies of them. Whoops. Make some copies of them. And then group them together. There might be a bit of a gap between them. Okay, that's all right. And now I'm going to move this here. I'm going to also go into these little cubes and make sure that the tag is set to foe, because the force applier is only affecting foes. And let's see what happens. Shoo-shing. So it might be that it's a little bit low. Let me try like this. Shoo-shing. Oh, you know what it probably is? It's probably not emitting all that much force. So let's go 100%, quite large, quite a decent amount of force. Now let's see. Swooshing. That's better. So, wow, it's kind of. Can you see the way that it's emitting the force, or that it's applying force? It's actually doing it in a way that the direction in which you are blasting the cubes is kind of like a bit more dynamic. You're not just blasting them backwards or whatever it is, or blasting them to the left. You can see, like over here, that these ones are getting thrown, not too far, but these ones are getting thrown much further. These ones are getting thrown decently in the middle as well. And the ones at the top are kind of just getting swept under. So what's cool about this is that, I mean, look also how this one goes really high. It just sort of demonstrates how this kind of just creates a bit more of a realistic feel when it comes to the wind sort of effect, or the air effect. So what we're going to do to turn this into ability is basically just emit it from your character. We might want to go into our paint stroke and go to the fleck properties, maybe make it a little bit more impasto, a little bit more stretched, a little bit of looseness, maybe some ruffle, maybe not ruffle, but just to give it a bit of more of a 3D sort of vibe. And that's looking really cool, friends. And if we add a few more of these, we'll be able to demonstrate this even more. So let's add this. So the ones on the right are not going to really be affected at all. But the ones on the left are going to be absolutely... And you can even see here. Do you see the way that the cubes are getting pushed sideways before they're getting pushed backwards? So here we are, pushed sideways, and then it's going to get pushed backwards because of the nature of our curve. So this ability to actually move force applies with keyframes was added about 2 or 3 updates ago, and it's just a really great feature. I enjoy the fact that we can sort of, you know, mess around with them before, because before it was a little bit tricky. And the reason why you're seeing, okay, look over here, swishing, this little cube is getting thrown like quite a distance because it's probably getting hit by the tail of the force applier as it's going out. So if you want to mess around with those things, you of course can. But yeah, that one's just getting quite a blast there. Anyway, enough nonsense. Let's turn this into an ability. So we're going to go into our character, make them a nice little timeline. In this timeline, we're going to do the most simple of animations. We're just going to go, we'll turn off our grid snap. We don't really need that for now. We'll do a bit of like a back lean, the shoulder rotation, the arm moves up. So they're kind of just like, they're stretching their arm backwards, and then they're going to sort of thrust it forward. So we'll put that there. We'll add another keyframe, just a base one. Nothing in it, just an empty one. So the character's going to do a bit of a wind up, and then they will lean forward, rotate the hips, rotate the shoulder, and the arm will sort of follow through. You might want to add in like another animation if it's a little bit too jerky. But we'll see just how this looks. And we'll of course want to add in an animation of the kind of, so it's kind of like your arm swings, you know what I'm saying? So the character goes like, yeah. Their arm sort of goes to the point that you want to hit, and then they kind of go past it as well. And then you can just copy this empty keyframe, put it at the end, and they'll kind of go back to their resting position. So here we are. Here. So that's pretty cool. We might make it a little bit faster, bring those keyframes a little bit closer together. And I would say probably if we look at our little keyframe and we bring our playhead, I'd say probably at maybe this point in the keyframe, we'll want to shoot out our little air blast. So let's go emitter, put it about here. We can just make it a small emitter. Cha-ching. And we're going to emit our object here, which is the paint stroke and the cube together. But just before we do that, friends, we're actually going to go L1 and X, L1 and square on our cube, and we're going to make it so that on the physical properties of this chap, it's going to be ignoring gravity. If we don't put on ignore gravity, then our air little thing is going to fall and it's just going to fall on the floor. So we want it to sort of get pushed and move in a straight line. You can choose whether you want this to move or not, move forward from your character, or if you just want it to be like stuck in one place. I might show you what it looks like when it's stuck in one place for now. So we'll set the emit speed to 0, and we're going to emit what? We're going to emit the old the good old little air slash that we've just made here. Emit mode is once. Okay, cool. So now I'm going to set this timeline's playback mode to once. Then I'm going to go into our little controller sensor and connect it to the square button. And so now, if I press the square button, shwa, we use my ability, and we can do it again. We can do it again. We can do it again. So as you can see, there's a few strokes that are left at the end here. So that's basically the last frame, because of course our air ability is going to only sort of go to the last frame, and then it'll stop on that last frame. So if we want to get rid of it so that it doesn't sort of hang around at the end of the day, which is also good for cutting down on thermo, we're going to go to emitter, and we're going to make emitted object lifetime about a second, maybe 0.9 seconds. Now let's see. So we go shwa. That looks perfect. So it completes its thing, and then of course it goes and disappears. Lovely stuff. And of course, I think the final stage will just be putting on, turning off preview invisibility, going to our little square, and turning off visible. We'll probably also want to turn off collidable, because this box isn't actually going to be interacting with the world. We don't want it to interact with the world. It's just so that we can turn our little paint stroke into a sort of physical object, or one that can sort of interact with the world in this particular way and have force applies attached to it and stuff. You don't need this cube. You could attach that timeline with the force apply directly onto the paint strokes, but I think that it just makes it a little bit easier. It can sometimes be finicky to attach things to paint strokes. So I call this air slash. And of course, friends, you can do whatever animation you like. You can use kicks and all those sorts of things. You can change the angle of the paint stroke. So for example, if you wanted to change it a little bit like this, so it kind of comes up a bit, that's of course perfect as well. So if I try it out, swishing, we now see it has a bit of a more up tilt. So yes, friends, you can pretty much just mess around with this as you desire and have some fun. That is the air slash complete. Woohoo! Next up is wind breath. So we're going to start off with a bit of design. The first thing I'm going to show you is how to do the air flowing into your lungs thing. So what you're going to want to do is go into paint mode, and you're going to go get yourself a nice color, and then, and of course your fleck type, I think we'll go with Baroque once again. So what you're going to want to do is just draw a little bit of an arc. It doesn't matter which direction it's in, and what you're going to do is go to duplicates, and you're going to go rotational duplicates around cylinder, and you'll get this kind of fountain looking vibe. Then you're going to go playback speed and put it on, the exact percentage will sort of depend, but you're going to put it on pulse, and you're going to put it on no loop. So you're going to turn loop off. It's on loop by default. So you'll see that it's kind of coming out, which isn't what we want. But no matter what direction you sort of paint it in, it'll always be moving outwards. So what you're going to do is you're just going to scope into your painting itself with L1 and X, grab it, and then just hold L2 and flip it around the other direction. And then it'll go, it'll go inwards. If it's like kind of not touching the center exactly, that's okay. You just go into your thing again and you move it. So wherever it was by default, that kind of, it takes it as that sort of center point. So where the original stroke was and where it started is the kind of original center point. In other words, so if you draw things sort of over into your painting, it'll use wherever the original stroke was. If I go back, for example, this is the kind of center point or the starting point. So by switching it around, you can also like copy it, so do something like this so that you can align it quite perfectly with the center. You get this, very nice. But actually, like, it's also kind of cool when you have a little bit off center, because then it does like a little bit of a swirly swirl. You know what I'm saying? That's pretty cool. So just mess around with that. In terms of the design, it's of course always up to you. Have some fun with it. Maybe add a bit of brightness. So go L1 and square and just increase the glow. That's looking cool. And if it's looking a little bit too like thin or whatever, or a little bit too uniform, you can just mess around with in the animation, or sorry, in the rotational duplicates, or rather just the duplicate screen. You can turn on scale jitter, which sort of changes the size of the frame, so that, or of the stroke, so that they're not all like identical. You can increase the copies, so it's like a little bit thicker. And yeah, you can have some fun with that. So that's what it's going to look like. It's like you're going to sort of summon the breath into your lungs for the first stage of this ability. And then, of course, you're going to want to do your air breath itself. So for that, I'm going to go pen strokes again, get ourselves a Baroque. Once again, that white color. And with this, friends, it's kind of up to you. I kind of do like I do like a sort of straight thing and then like a little bit of a curl. And I do sort of like a few of them. Just trying to create that sort of classic wind vibe. I also do like a few little off tilts. But really it depends on your particular preference. So I'm going to go like this, and then in terms of duplicates, sorry, let me just see. You might want to actually use positional duplicates and then sort of like reduce the spread a bit, so that you get like a kind of nice thing. If that's not your vibe, you can of course also go into Fleck properties, increase the impasto, increase the looseness, maybe a bit of the stretch. Not really the ruffle, because if you ruffle then you kind of lose that shape you had. And something else you might want to do is like grab some of these swirly swirls that you've made with R2, or sorry, L1 and R2, and then you can make a clone of it, and you can sort of stick it out to the side a little bit. Make some copies, hold L1, grab it with R2, make yourself a nice clone, and then your breath can kind of have a bit more variation, so it's not just sort of like existing on one plane, you know what I'm saying? It's got a bit of variation in it in terms of the angle. So I'm just copying some of the strokes I've made and sort of putting them around. That's looking pretty cool indeed. I'm going to go L1 and square, and then I'm going to go playback speed. So that's looking pretty cool. It's very nice and swirly. I'm also going to maybe try it with pulse. See what it looks like. It might not be exactly the vibe you're looking for, but also experiment with trail length, because if your trail length is very short, it's just going to look like, you know, not much at all. If you want your air moves to be kind of like imperceptible, you can definitely go with a very short trail length. But if you want it to like look quite clear, you'll want to increase the length of it there. You can also do a bit of time offset, and that might sort of make it look a bit, you know, there's a little bit of variation. But this I feel like also has just like strong windy sort of vibes. And once again, you can go to duplicates if you want to sort of thicken it a bit, like we've got there. Add a bit of jitter. Might be a little bit crazy, but it's up to you. Rotational duplicates aren't exactly the one, because we want to sort of do it in one direction. The only thing that could possibly work is like a round hemisphere. But even then, rotational duplicates aren't really the ones you're going to be looking for. You might sort of try and experiment with some of these other ones, the positional duplicates, and just see what it looks like when you've got multiple. See if it's like a little bit crazy or it's like a little bit much. Generally, I sort of go for something not too hectic, so I might just do like one or so duplicates in addition to whatever we've got, just to get that nice wind vibe. I'm going to increase the brightness. Swish, swish, swing. So now we kind of have this. If it's a little bit too slow, we can of course increase that windiness, which is lovely. Maybe have a bit of time offset. So now there's just like a bit of a crazy wind. It's a little bit bright. Maybe a bit like that. Looks like a bit of a cloud going on. And that's dope. So sweet friends, now we have the air sort of going into our lungs, which is very cool, and we have the air getting blown out of our lungs. Once again, if it's not quite thick enough for you or not enough on the side, just copy some of those strokes and yeah, just sort of change their position and have some fun with it. Get creative, you know what I mean? And you've got this nice sort of vibe going on. If it's like a little bit too messy for you or a little bit too rough, you can of course reduce the looseness, reduce the stretch, for example. All of these things you can mess around with and it creates a different vibe. Actually, increasing the stretch, like I've done to 200%, actually makes it look pretty sort of pretty sharp and elegant. It's actually pretty cool. So yeah, mess around with these sort of features. Lovely stuff. So imagine it sort of coming here like out of the sort of the character's breath, as it were. So we have our two elements of the wind breath. Let's turn it into an ability now. So we're going to go into our character. We've already got our previous move over here. So I'm just going to put down, in a similar fashion, put down a little timeline. Then I'm going to go to keyframe, just a blank one for now. Put in another keyframe. And this will be like the character preparing their breath. So this is where they sort of breathe in. I'm going to put on puppet mirror and stick up both of their arms. Lovely stuff. Then I'm going to go and get myself another keyframe and I'm going to sort of like move the hands inward so that it's almost like it looks like you are using your hands to sort of pull the air into your lungs. Lovely stuff. So the air will be coming in. And then we're going to sort of hold it there for a bit. So it's going to like, the air is coming in during this keyframe. And then we're going to sort of do our epic wind vibe there. So I'm just going to blend these two keyframes. And what I'm going to do for this part is they're going to lean forward. Just turn off that quickly. They're going to lean forward and sort of stick their hands, their arms out on either side. And then they're going to sort of maybe put like a foot forward, whatever it might be. And they're going to, lean forward like this. And then that's sort of the pose that we're going to be doing, which is looking cool. So if we play it, it's going to look like so. Lovely stuff. And then we'll just put a normal keyframe over here. Cool, so they'll go like lovely. It's quite fast. You can sort of slow it down depending on how you want to do it. Cool. So, how are we going to add these in? Well, we're going to use our good old-fashioned emitters. And we're going to put one here. It'll just be a sort of small one. So the character goes... So actually maybe it'll start a little bit before. So it's kind of like as you are drawing your hands in, the wind will start to like appear. So let's go like this. We're going to go emit speed 0 and then object to emit, and you're going to sort of select this one over here. Can't actually see it super well. So I'm just going to go play for a second so that I can now see it. I'm going to object to emit, and I'm going to choose this one. Then I'm going to sort of determine where it is just by placing this bauble, and we'll kind of experiment with this and see where it is. So if I play it goes, if I sort of, oh, we'll also go once, and time between emits equal to 0. So let's just see. Cool. So that's looking pretty good. I'm just going to go preview invisibility, turn that off, and I'm going to increase the speed of this because it's a little bit slow. So let's have a look. We can turn preview invisibility back on. Now, that's pretty cool. I'm also just going to move it over a bit. A little bit to the right, a little bit down. So now it goes. Lovely stuff. Let's try again. That's cool. Maybe a little bit further down. No, actually, the angle's a little bit off. You need to kind of, look at it from multiple angles to see if it's correct. That's not bad. Down a bit. That's pretty good. And from the front, how does it look? From the front, it's a little bit off to the left. So let's just adjust this. It's pretty cool. The thing's head's also moving because it's got that auto look stuff. So let's adjust. Looking cool. Okay, sweet. And from the side, that's looking good. And from the back, that's looking good. And from the side, cool. So now we've got our nice sort of breath appearing over there. I'm just going to move this to the side. So they do this, they sort of get a nice breath of the good stuff, and then they will use their other breath ability, which is their wind breath. So they're breathing it in, and now they're going to breathe it out. So object to emit is going to be this, and it's going to be, we can line it up here, sort of right by where the face is. And we'll look at our keyframe, and we'll see, okay, cool, it's there. So what I need to do is lower it ever so slightly, bring it in a little bit closer. How's it from this angle? Looking pretty good. A little bit to the left maybe. Lovely stuff. Okay, sweet. But with this one, it's going to be slightly different. So we're going to go time between emits 0.1 second, emitted object lifetime 0.2 seconds, and continuous. So it's going to be emitting continuously. We're also going to need to increase the duration of this emitter. Ah, dang, I've actually got... Sometimes when you make an emitter and you make it super small, you can't make it bigger again. So I'm going to need to actually delete this now. This is a common problem that I run into, so I think it'll be useful to see it in action. So we make ourselves a new emitter for the duration of this keyframe. L1 and square, emit speed 0, object to emit this nice bit of wind. We'll line it up once again, get it close to the characters where their sort of face is, where their mouth will be. Lovely stuff. Maybe a little bit to the right. And it's going to be emit mode continuous. Time between emits 0.1 second. Object lifetime 0.2 seconds. And there we are. So now if we do it... Sorry, I was just holding the keyframe there. Now breathe in and... That's pretty cool. Breathe in and... So, there was a little bit of keyframe overlap, or like there was the animation looking not super great. That's because we actually need to turn off procedural animation so that the character doesn't do other things at the same time. So now let's smoothen this up because our character's sort of looking all over and not sort of aligning very nicely. So we're going to go animate, keyframe, and we're going to go to our puppet and we're going to turn off our procedural animation. So we're going to go to behavior and we're going to turn off procedural animation. Oh, sorry, I wasn't actually using my keyframe there. So make sure you're recording with your keyframe, turn off procedural animations. This will be for the duration of our animation. You also have to turn off poses with the blank sliding puppet because he's also got some poses that sort of interfere with stuff. And we'll just make it for the duration of this animation. So while you're doing it, here, you're going to have your own animations that are not being interrupted. And we'll just call this no proc for no procedural animation. No pros, you might say. Lovely stuff. So now it's going whoosh, that's lovely. And it's looking pretty cool, but one thing I also want to have is that when you're using your wind breath, you can't move, but you can turn. So if I use this for now, for example, let's just demonstrate. I'll connect it to the triangle button. And of course just make the timeline playback mode once. So if I press triangle, and if I do again, and I sort of run around, it looks a bit weird. So what I want to do now is make it so that you can still turn while you use it, but you cannot actually move. So for that, I'm going to put in another keyframe. We could use the same keyframe, but I'm just doing it to be thorough. We'll go L1 and square on our puppet. If your puppet is a group or has a bunch of things in it, you might have to press L1 and X to go into the puppet group, so that you're looking at the puppet. But when you've got the puppet themselves, L1 and square, and then you can reduce their run/walk speed to 0. Now they will not be able to move, but they will still be able to turn. So let's just call this turn only, or no move, or whatever you like. Turn only. So now when I use this move, I stand still, but I can do a nice breath like in like all directions. But it's looking cool, but we do not yet have the awesome breath effect, which is of course just the force applier. So we're going to put a force applier. We'll just move these keyframes down so that we can line it up nicely. And we'll put down our, sorry, that was an emitter. We'll put down a force applier and make sure that it is the same length as this chap. And the force applier is not going to be anything fancy. Strength 100%, force maybe something like 15. And we're going to put it in a cylinder. Grab yourself a grid snap, put it like so, make it a little bit smaller, but make it quite long. Yeah, I'd say probably about that. Make sure that it only affects foe and none of these other things, so that we don't blast ourselves into the distance. Yeah, so it's pretty strong, and we'll also have a bit of a zone fall off. So this is where like it'll still be affected, but kind of only slightly. So we can adjust this and adjust this. Actually, that's a little bit too big, I'd say. Just sort of around the edges. And if you want to increase the zone fall off, but only in one direction, so for example, if I increase Z, it goes backwards as well. If I don't want Z to be going backwards as well, you go L1 and then R2, and you adjust the zone fall off rather than the normal zone. So if you go R2, you'll adjust the normal zone size. L1 and R2, and you'll adjust the sort of outer zone fall off, as it were. So let's do a bit of this, and that's looking pretty cool. So if we go from here, probably not much of an effect, but if we go a bit closer, we have a nice wind breath that is looking pretty sweet. Wow, that is actually really good. Alright, it's maybe a little bit strong. We might want to make it a little bit weaker, and by weaker I mean reduce the force speed, maybe by something like 12, so now it's 5 meters a second less. Still pretty dang strong, but yeah, it's looking great. Lovely stuff. So the force is tied to our character's position, and the animation of the wind blowing is tied to a bunch of little instances of that paint stroke sort of flying off into the distance. We emit a bunch of them rather than just one, so that we can change direction nicely. Because if we want to just emit one and our body turns, that first one is going to be in the original position that it was. There you go. Alrighty friends, so there you have wind breath. Ooooh. Now it's tornado time. So what we're going to do is we're going to go guides, put on a grid snap, and then we're going to go into modes, sculpt mode, and get ourselves a nice small little cube. Then we're going to go into paint mode, and we're going to get ourselves a nice white color. We'll go once again with Baroque. And now we can turn the grid snap off quickly. And what we're going to do is we're just going to paint just like a little line. It doesn't matter. We're going to delete this one. We're just using this to sort of position our thing. So I'm going to grab it, put it fairly central, and then I'm going to connect these together, and I'm going to go group. So now this block and this weird little stroke are together. Next up, I'm going to put my grid snap on again, go gadgets, grab myself a rotator, so that's in moves and output, grab myself a rotator, and I will snap it on. Ooh, I will attempt to snap it on to the, okay. Attempt to snap it on. Sorry, my my grid was a little bit too big. And then I'm going to, while my grid is on, change this so that it's going to be spinning sort of sideways. So that's looking cool. I'll increase the strength. You can maybe increase the speed as well. Now you can turn that grid snap off, and this is where the fun begins. So what we've got is we've got a spinning box with a paint stroke attached. So now if we make any changes to this paint stroke, it's going to also affect the box. Or not the box, sorry, but like if we make changes to this paint stroke, it's going to automatically create like a bit of a spiral pattern. So check this out. I've got my paint stroke there, and I'm just going to hold R2. And as you can see, kind of like a potter's table, you are creating like a bit of a spinny vibe. And if I press L1 now and I move a bit downwards, you're able to create this like really cool tornado-y pattern. So you can change the angle a bit so you can have some fun with this. And you can sort of go downwards whilst also moving towards the center. And that'll kind of create a bit of like a narrower vibe. You can of course also move up again as you desire. But you're pretty much letting the rotator do the work over here. So I'm pretty much just holding R2 and the rotator is making things interesting. If you want to make your tornado have like a thin point, you just sort of go towards the center and sort of just stick there and just go a bit downwards. The closer to the center you are, the thinner it is, and the further away from the center you are, the thicker it is. It's as simple as that. Alrighty, so this was literally just one sort of paint stroke vibe that I've done. You can add some more. And create yourself a nice little tornado. Mostly just going sort of up and down. And if you want to widen it out a bit at the top, you just press R2 and you just sort of go out of it. So once again, like if you go towards the center, you'll have like a small circle. If you go further away from the center, you'll have like a big one. I hope that makes sense. And yeah, so that's kind of the beginning of a little tornado that we've got there. And it's looking pretty cool. And for now that we've done that, you can go into it and you can look at that original paint stroke that you did, and you can actually delete it because we don't need it anymore. That was just the sort of base one. And then yeah, so now we've got our little spinning dude over here, and it's looking pretty darn cool. Now you don't actually need this rotator anymore because we can use the rotate functions built into the emitter that we're going to use to shoot this out. So you can now delete that little rotator. Oh, and you now just have this sort of pristine tornado vibe. Now we can change the brightness of this tornado so that we have like a bit of variation. You can do all the usual sort of craziness when it comes to stretching and looseness and whatever it might be, to give you the desired sort of tornado effect that you're looking for. Have some fun with it, friends. It is actually really fun to do stuff like this. Alrighty. So next up, what we're going to do is figure out how to have a bit of a, shall we say, the sort of being drawn towards the tornado effect, you know, the pulling in. So we're going to go to our moves and output and get ourselves a force applier. And with the grid snap, because we like things to be sort of aligned nicely, we can just snap it down. Ta-ching. So we have one force applier over here. I'll just move it over like this. And then we're going to have another force applier. I'm going to make a copy just over here. So the first one, oh sorry, this one's not actually surface snapped. So I'll just surface snap this one as well. So the first one is going to be the one that pulls the stuff towards us. So we'll go a bit like this. We're going to go force mode pull, strength 100%, speed fairly decent, something like 10 maybe. And we're going to have a central sort of part that kind of encompasses the center of the tornado. You can of course do like a bit of a cylinder if you want to have the sort of cylindrical tornado vibe, and make it fairly thin, I would say, fairly thin, because this is kind of the strongest part. And then we're also going to have a zone fall off, so that can be sort of a bit bigger, because this is where, like, if you're close to the tornado, you'll be drawn towards it, and you're basically drawn towards the strongest part of the tornado. So something a bit like this. You can actually make it bigger than you think, because this is at the sort of edge. The force isn't very strong. It's just sort of like a light pulling. So let's see what it looks like at the moment. I'm just going to turn off this second force apply that I got. So I'm just going to move it over here. And as you can see, it sort of pulls the cubes towards it, and that's looking pretty cool. Lovely stuff. And if I move it around, you see it sort of pulls them. It begins to pull them because they're in the zone fall off. You can see that sort of pillars being affected. It's being a bit affected, and then it falls over. So that's a very cool vibe. But we don't just want our tornado to be pulling. We, you know, like sort of towards the center, because generally there's like an eye of a storm sort of in the middle. So I'm actually going to delete this one I copied, because I'm going to use the first one that we used. Sorry, not the best practice, as it were. But I'm going to use this one, and this one is going to be slightly different. Rather than pulling towards, it's going to be pushing away. So we'll have it nice and central. So they're nice, both nice and central. And this one that I've just copied, this is going to be the pushy one. Make sure once again that it's surface snapped onto the old surface of your little cube that you've got there. And so this one is going to be pushing, and it's not going to have a zone fall off. So zone fall off will not be there. It'll have basically this zone. And now we'll see what happens. Basically, we want to just make it so that it is able to pull without sort of being inside the eye of the storm. So when it kind of approaches the eye of the storm, it kind of just like sits a little bit on the periphery. You might want to slightly increase the size of this one. So now we try, and what's cool about this is now the things sort of approach the tornado, and they also get sort of flung away, which is very cool. It might be that I've made it, you kind of experiment with this, because the size determines like a lot of what's going on. So if we make it a little bit smaller, now it'll get drawn towards it, and if you make it slightly bigger, you'll start to see things sort of getting thrown. So that's pretty cool. You can of course also make this like a bit of a dynamic effect, like you can make it so that there's a timeline that changes the size of these zones, so that as the tornado goes, it sort of will push and pull and do all sorts of crazy stuff. So what we're going to do to make this a kind of cool tornado is make it so that it kind of fades out over time. So I'm going to put down a little timeline, lovely stuff, and surface snap it onto this little cube that we've got. And I'm going to make it so that the tornado is going to last, let's say, something like 4 seconds. Is that cool? 4 seconds seems good to me. And at the sort of 4-second mark, then it's going to start to fade. So I've got two sort of, well actually I don't need this keyframe at all. So at the 4-second mark, it's all going to be chill, it's all going to be whatever, at the same sort of level of transparency. But when we get to 5 seconds, it's going to become completely invisible. So we L1 and X to get into this group. Then we are going to go towards the old painting properties, and we're going to go opacity 0%. So basically what happens is, the tornado is tornadoing, it's living its best, it's going around, having a good time, and then it's going to go zzz, and it sort of dissipates. So we might want to make it sort of like this, and you can adjust the time so it's like, okay, cool. So it goes like this, and then it might say, for example, at 5 seconds, then disappear. But not only is it going to lose its sort of transparency or become more transparent, it's also going to lose its strength. So we're going to go force. You can either reduce the force speed or the force strength. You can make it 0 so that both of these lose their strength. So now let's see, the tornado is tornadoing, and then it loses its strength a bit. Lovely stuff. So I'm going to end the timeline so that it ends at this point. I think that's around the 5-second mark. Lovely stuff. So this keyframe is reducing our opacity, and it's also weakening our force applier. Lovely stuff. And you might say, okay, Meanad, this looks cool, bro, but like, let's make it happen. Let's turn it into ability. And also, this thing should be spinning. And for me, I'm like, mate, I totally agree with you. So I'm going to be a bit lazy here. I'm just going to copy this timeline, which is our wind slash timeline. And I'm going to connect it to, let's say, the R2 button. And now when I press R2, so it's going to go, hey, yeah. And when he does his sort of animation, it's going to, rather than emit the wind slash, it's now going to emit the tornado. And similar with the wind slash, I'm just going to go preview invisibility, turn that off. We're going to go to our little cube here, and we're going to say physical properties, ignore gravity, so that it moves in a straight line and it doesn't sort of go doo-doo and sort of fall over. So now we are going to be emitting this chap, and this one is actually going to be moving, unlike the wind slash. Sorry, I said I was actually going to show you what the wind slash looks like when you move it, but you can sort of experiment with that. It just sort of moves it forward. Alrighty, so the emit speed is going to be something like nothing super fast. I feel like tornadoes generally move kind of slowly, but of course, whatever works for you. And we're going to, of course, have rotation speed. Now make sure that you have your grid snap on when you align these things. We want the rotation speed to be pretty fast, I would say. Nothing too ridiculous, because it'll sort of affect things, but let's see what's going on. So we now have it. It's going to be emitting it at speed. Let's go. So at the moment it literally smacked into something because I forgot to change something, which is of course the old fact that it is this little cube here is actually collidable. So let's make it non-collidable, not visible, and let's slow that down considerably because that was very fast. Let's make it something like 5 meters, 3 meters. Let's maybe a little bit slow. Something like 5 meters, and then emitted object lifetime is 5 seconds because that's how long it is until it starts to fade out. So now let's check. Zoo, 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 zoo. So it sort of brings the things with it. Lovely stuff. Okay, cool. That's looking cool. It isn't sort of pulling things in to the extent that I would like them to. So I'm going to increase the strength of that ever so slightly. And maybe also increase the size of that zone ever so slightly. We experiment. Lovely stuff. So that's looking pretty cool. It's sort of going with it. It's sort of pulling things into its windy embrace and also sort of chucking them. If you aren't interested in the sort of it throwing things around, you don't need to have this the pushy force applier. You don't necessarily need to have that. You can just have it so that it's just your pulley one. But I kind of just add the pushy one as well as the pulley, so that you've got just like a little bit of, you know, everything's not mashing itself into the center. And there's just a little bit of this craziness. Something else that I sort of added when I did this before is I also added another force applier. Make sure to surface snap it on. And this one isn't super strong. It's kind of just, I did like a bit of a cylinder, and then a sort of fairly large zone fall off. Something like this. Something like this. And then it's a directional one, and it kind of just throws things up into the air. So it's kind of like, it just makes it so, I'll also reduce the strength of it a bit. It's kind of just that it increases the sort of, you know, the Y value. It throws things up a bit as it approaches, which is also the vibe generally. Lovely stuff. You also really get the sense of stuff like spinning around here, which is very cool. Did I make that push? Yeah, okay, so it pushes things upwards. Once again, you can reduce the zone size of this one. This is the sort of, the pushy one. Cha-ching. It's more about the zone fall off, so that there's just like a bit of an effect of being sort of pushed upwards. So you get that sense of like wind passing through an area. So even if these things don't get hit by it, they still like interrupted, or you can see there's like a bit of a windy effect. And of course, if you feel that your tornado isn't strong enough, you can just increase the zone size, or indeed just increase the size of the tornado itself, because it's kind of small at the moment. So you can just make it a bit bigger, and then you'll have some crazy fun to mess around with. Lovely stuff. So there you are, friends. That is how you have yourself a nice little tornado. And I think it's looking pretty darn cool at the moment. We might need some more of these chaps just to demonstrate everything that's going on. So now we can do something like this. So that's looking pretty cool, friends. I might make it so that it's, yeah, okay, it's pushing, it's pulling. You can see that things are kind of, what's the word? They're clumping a little bit in the middle. If there is a little bit of clumpage, it might just be a matter of increasing the size of, or changing the size of your various force appliers, and having some fun with that. So you might increase this, whoops. But like when you increase the pushy one, it's ever so slightly. Just so that things kind of are spaced out a bit better. So now you can see things aren't clumped as much. Like before, they were falling like pretty much in like one big square. Now you're really getting the sense of the tornado is like chucking things as it goes. It's not just sort of, they're not just getting sort of stuck in their position. But of course, angle and all sorts of things like make a difference here as well. So yeah. Yo, this is really fun. Okay, sweet friends. So there you are. You're pretty much messing around with these various force appliers. You've got the design down, you've got the logic down, and you're having a great time. There you are. That's the tornado. Whoop whoop. Now let's move on to the air scooter. So let's start with the design of the little air ball that you sort of ride, or the air ball, you know, air ride, the sort of classic airbender move. So we're going to go sculpt mode, guides, grid snap, get ourselves a sphere, choose the color sort of whitish. That's looking pretty cool. We can make it about so big. Cool, cool, cool. Now I'm going to go L1 and square, and I'm going to change the looseness so that it's a bit looser. I'm going to change the impasto maybe, and you can sort of mess around with the ruffle if you so desire. I'm definitely going to change the fleck type, so I'm going to go style mode. I'm going to go flex. I'm going to choose our lovely baroque. So it's just a little bit more airy. Then I'm going to go into effects, and I'm going to sort of mess around maybe with wave, maybe with a little bit with evaporate. Not a huge amount, of course. You can also try a bit of, maybe not flow. You can try really just sort of mess around with these and see whichever one sort of works best for you. That's looking pretty darn cool. So we'll make it nice and bright. Swish, swish, swing. But now, friends, if you want to sort of, you can also go to this particular thing, this particular little sculpt that we've got here, and you can actually decide to turn it into a painting if you want. So you can go with an X and go convert to painting. It'll of course have a different vibe. You might want to go to fleck properties and sort of mess around with it. Once again, go to your stroke and sort of mess around with it evaporate. So it's lost a little bit of its sort of circulariness. Okay, so you really kind of just like experiment with this and see whatever vibe you like. Actually, evaporate is not bad, but it's just going out a little bit far. So yeah, in terms of the design, it's very much up to you. Yeah, I might actually, rather than going with the convert to painting, I might just stick with the original. But you can also do a bit of a mix of both. So now I've got this one, and I can copy it, and I can convert this one to painting. And I can do it, for example, like we had it on evaporate, looked pretty cool. Something like this maybe, but you'd maybe just make it a little bit smaller. And you could also change the color of it. So for example, you could go into coat mode and make this kind of like a little bit grayer, for example. And then you could add it to this one, swing, and just adds like a little bit of interest. You can of course go to your sculpt and you can paint it with like just a little bit of this and that. Now when painting stuff, I would say go with a nice soft blend and just like add just a little bit of sort of variation to your air ball. Lovely stuff. You might want to choose your colors because it might go with some like pretty dark ones. So that's pretty cool. That's pretty cool. A little bit of this, a little bit of that. Okay, cool. And now we have something like a sort of air ball. Whoopsie. Lovely stuff. Okay, cool. So friends, that's looking pretty cool. We've got a nice little sort of air ball. We'll group them together. That is looking pretty darn sweet. So what we're going to do for this one, friends, is basically make it so that we like ride this air ball, but we're not really riding it. We're kind of just like speeding up our character and teleporting this scooter air ball to our current position. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my character, and actually friends, before we do that, I'm kind of just thinking that I want a bit more spin on this. So I'm going to put on a rotator. I'm going to make it move like pretty fast. I feel like it rolls forward, so. We can also, you know, mess around with it. But I feel like it kind of rolls forward, you know what I mean? But I feel like it can also roll to the side. So really, whichever sort of direction you sort of like, that's totally cool. So now when I sort of create my little ball, it's rotating. It's got all sorts of crazy effects. And if you want to sort of brighten it up again, you can go to coat mode and increase the glow. Triangle if you want to decrease the glow. Yeah, that's looking pretty cool. Okay, sweet. So friends, we have our air ball, and now we want to turn it into an ability, an air scooter. So we're going to go into animation, grab ourselves a keyframe, and we're going to go into our puppet, and we're going to lift them decently off the ground so it looks like they're sort of floating. Now their one leg we're going to put in a sort of cross-legged position. You can just grab the heel and put it sort of here so it's almost by their left hand, and then you're going to go and IK to FK. We'll put it just like that. So let's go back into that keyframe. Then the central leg we're going to put over here, or the other leg we're going to put sort of centrally. You can use whichever foot you like. The other leg goes here, sort of centrally, but kind of bent. And then we're going to go puppet mirror and control the arms so that they're kind of like in the middle, shall we say. So they're just going to be kind of hands in the center. Lovely stuff. So the character is going to go into this pose. We're also going to add a little bit of a tag here. So we just throw it on a tag, and this will be the character. You can of course call this airbender, whatever you prefer. And this tag is going to be, we'll put on a quick grid snap so we can position it nicely. This little tag is going to be kind of in the sort of center of the character, on the floor. It can be really anywhere. And now we're going to go to our little airball, and we're going to attach a teleporter to it. So we're going to attach a teleporter. Whoopsie. And this teleporter, which I can now no longer select, this teleporter is going to have enter tag name, and I'm going to press down, and it's going to be character, and we're going to match target position, but not really target orientation at the moment. We don't have to worry about that, because we're kind of going to be, it's kind of just going to be spinning, so we don't have to worry about its orientation. Lovely. So now if we test it out, it's going to look like this. And look, we're already sort of flying off. It's pretty funny, actually. Lovely stuff. So we're going to make it so that this is non-collidable. So we try again, and it's looking pretty cool. So if we are in this position, it's going to look something like this. We can see that our little airball is a little bit low. So I'm going to go to my teleporter. I'm going to check it out, and then I'm going to press play, in other words the R3 button, and I'm going to adjust the position of it by, whoopsie, make sure your grid snap isn't on because it might be a little bit too much. I'm going to sort of just position it. So if you grab this little white gizmo while it's running, you can adjust your position on the fly. So if I check this out, and I play, we're going to see it's at a fairly decent spot. You might need to lower the old hips a bit. So before we do that, make sure that all of your animations are FK, so that when you lower one thing, they're all sort of lower. If I didn't do that, for example, the foot would stay in that position. So make sure your feet and your arms and everything are on FK, and then we'll go here. So now we check it out, and it looks pretty cool. Of course, we'll also want to, with this keyframe, not only put on our sort of scooter pose, but we'll also deactivate these poses, and we'll go to our puppet and deactivate procedural animation. So when this is on, we're going to be looking like that. Shwang. So friends, that's already looking pretty darn cool. So for this one, I'm going to say pose. Pose, let me say scooter pose, plus, let's say scooter pose plus no proc. So you get into your particular position, and you don't have to worry about other crazy stuff. So this is going to be a toggleable ability. So I'm going to maybe use circle. By default, this will depossess your puppet, so you might want to delete that connection. But I'm going to say, okay, cool. When I press circle, I'm going to go into this mode, and I want it to be a toggle. So I'm going to go into my logic and processing and grab myself a signal manipulator. When I press circle, it's going to go into the left side of the signal manipulator in the input. And we're going to go to custom remapper, and we're going to go to toggle output at on. So when I press the button, it's going to toggle it. So now if I press circle, I'm going to run around and run around. If I press circle, I'm now on my little air ball, and if I jump, it's going to come with me. Lovely stuff. But of course, we only want our air ball to be sort of visible or sort of in the scene when we actually use our ability. We use our air scooter ability. So what we're going to do for that is we're going to make it so that it is in the scene, and you can make it that it's kind of, I mean, you don't necessarily need to actually omit it. We could just make it so that this is invisible. So we'll just go to this particular group and we'll just make it invisible. And then when the ability is active, it will make it visible. So now we're looking around, and then we go swing, and now we're riding our little air scooter very nicely. That's looking dope. But something else we want to do, once again with this keyframe is doing a whole bunch right now. It's also going to increase our speed, so we can increase our run speed, we can increase our walk speed, whichever of those you like. You can also increase your acceleration and maybe reduce your deceleration, so like you really get that sense of speed. So shwing, shwing, shwing. So now when I let go, I'm still sort of going for quite a while, because this thing has quite a bit of oomph, quite a bit of vuma. Okay, maybe that's a little bit too much vuma. Okay, so let's reduce that so it's not too much. And you can actually make it so that you have no walk speed, so you just have like run speed, so there's no sort of slow and fast. There's kind of just like one speed, which is fast. And you can also increase your turn speed, all that sort of stuff. So okay, maybe don't increase your turn speed, because that does make it a little bit manic. So I'll reduce this, I'll set that back to normal, and I'll maybe reduce the acceleration so that it's not too fast. But just so that you sort of speed up a bit faster, and you slow down a little bit slower. So you sort of keep moving. All of these things you must of course mess with at your leisure. Lovely stuff. So now you're moving a bit faster, you've got your like air vibe going on, and we might also want to make it so that when you use your air ability, it sort of blows things around a bit. So that's also super easy. Just add a little force applier, and it'll be affecting just like foes or objects or scenery or whatever it might be. Nothing too hectic, maybe 100% strength, but only something like, 3.5 or something like that. And of course it's only active when this sort of toggle is on. So we go and we sort of blow things around as we move, which is pretty cool. That is pretty great. It's maybe a little bit too strong, so we maybe make it just like 1 meter. So now we can go so now like as we do it, it's sort of there. Or maybe the strength was fine, but it was just a little bit too big. So let's go over here. Maybe we have a little bit of a zone fall off, which is always nice. Always makes it interesting. So now when we're sort of close to something, we'll chuck it totally out of the way. Cool. So one thing I noticed is if you increase acceleration a lot, like I've done, it'll actually make it so that when you turn, you can like basically build up speed until you're like a madman. So maybe just reduce deceleration a little bit, increase acceleration a little bit, but nothing too crazy. So there we're looking pretty cool. Alrighty friends, so now we have figured out the air slash, the old air wind breath. We've figured out the tornado, and we've also done the air scooter, which we can use to move around and also just like move objects out of the way, which is pretty dope. So yes friends, I mean there's all sorts of other things you can do. If you wanted to do something like an air dash, for example, maybe while you're in your scooter mode or something like that, you could totally do that. All you need to do is add like a little bit of a force applier, and it would allow you to just like dash around while you were in the air. So what you might do is make it so that when you press a button, let's say like R3 or whatever it might be, you would have like a little bit of a dash. So you'd have a force applier, and you'd have your like R3 button or L3 or whatever you like, and it would affect you. It would push in a particular direction, so you'd have 100%, no, maybe something like 10 meters, and you could have in terms of the force type, it would be directional, and it would push you forwards. So it'll push you forward. So basically in whatever direction you are currently moving. So it'll push you forwards when you press the R3 button. So let's check this out. It would go like, let's try it out. Zing, zing. So of course we'd only want it to work for sort of like a fraction of a second. So what we'd do is we'd put this in a little timeline. Swish, swish, swishing. And then we could have ourselves a little directional dash. And it's just literally just for a fraction of a second. So if I tie it up here, and I go here, and I go R3, that's looking pretty cool, and I go R3, ching, zing. So as you can see, it sort of gives me like a little bit of a dash. And I've also, because the keyframe, or rather the timeline lasts for a certain amount of time, for let's say like 1 second, that means a second has to pass before you can dash again, so you kind of build in a cooldown. So for example, swing, I do a little dash there, swing, I do one there, swing. I'm not moving very far, so if you're wanting to like move like a little bit further when you do your particular dash in whichever direction you'd like, you just increase it ever so slightly. But something else you'll want to do when you do a dash is make yourself not fall, so you kind of can do an air dash. So to do that, you'll add a mover, and you'll go move speed 0. You don't have to worry about strength or whatever, but you can have overall damping 100%. Then you're going to reduce X, Z, and you don't have to worry about mover damping, but you might as well do that as well. We're going to damp in the Y axis, in other words, up and down, so you won't be able to fall when you do your little dash. So for example, I can do this, and I can jump, and I can do my dash, jump, dash, jump, dash. Oh wait, sorry, have I set it to playback mode set to once? Okay, let's set playback mode to once. So now the cooldown thing won't work in the same way, but you can do it like so. Now, swing, I can dash, swishing, swishing, swing, swing, swing. At the moment I can permanently dash if I just keep mashing it, so you might want to add something like a, if you want to add like a little bit of a timer to this, or a little bit of a cooldown, what you'll do is you'll add in a counter. So when you press R3 +1, when the counter is full, it activates the timeline. When the timeline ends, it resets the counter. So now it'll last for like 1 second or whatever. So we go swing, swing. If I mash it multiple times, it only works 1 time. Swing. So now we have like a little bit of a directional dash. Swishing, swishing in all the various directions with a bit of a cooldown, which is pretty dope. And we might want to add just like a little bit of a, a little bit of like a wind kickoff when we use this particular ability. So I'm just going to turn off my grid snap, get our white Baroque streak, which is our current one, and just do like a bit of a whoosh. Let me just do like a little bit of this. That's looking cool. Maybe also just like some swing, just like kicking up the wind a bit. Swoosh. There we go. Make it a little bit glowy. Lovely stuff. Animate it. Swing. But of course just pulse, and quite fast, and no loops. It just goes whoosh, whoosh. So when we do our dash, it just gives us a little bit of air. And now we can make it so that we emit a bit of the old, we grab an emitter, and we're going to emit that little paint stroke that we've just added. We're only going to emit 1. Time between emits we don't have to worry about because we're just doing 1. Emit speed will be 0. And we're going to emit this literally just right here. So when we press our dash button, we're going to do a little dash, and it'll give us a bit of air behind us. So we dash. Okay, it's actually, we're moving so fast that you can't actually see the dash. So what we might want to do is actually, we can either move the dash like a little bit forward, or another thing that we can do is, well actually let's just try that first. So we'll move the dash a little bit forward. We'll maybe make it like a little bit larger, so that there's like, you really get that sense of like kicking off from the ground when you do it. Jing, doof, 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 doof. So it's still kind of like, we might even move it like even more forward, so that you get that sense of that kickoff. There you can kind of see it. I think that's pretty cool. If we can do it here as well. So we can jump, dash, jump, dash, jump, dash, jump, dash. Okay, cool. So there you are, friends. We've done a we've got our, let's go over it from the top. We've got our slash. We've got our little breath. We've got our tornado. We've got our very cool scooter. And now we have a dash. Whooshing, swooshing. A sort of directional dash that prevents you from falling, which is once again very airbendery. But yes, friends, thank you so much for checking out this video. I really appreciate all the support as always. This airbender one was a long time. It was in the old workshop for a long time, but I'm glad that it actually is able to be released at long last. I'm sure all the airbenders are overjoyed. And now we've done the 4 elements of Avatar. We've done, first it was earth, then I think it was fire, then water, and there was a very long break, and now air. So we've done them all. And I feel like it's very, very airbender fashion to disappear for a very long time and then come back. I think that's very much in law, as it were. But yes, friends, so thank you so much once again for checking out this video. I really appreciate it, and I shall catch you on the flip-flop. Peace out.